Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'suk b'divrei Torah v'arivna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toracha b'finu b'fiavcha beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzeimcha beit Yisrael kulanu yodea shemecha v'lomdei Tortech lishma Baruch atah Adonai l'mei Torah l'mo Yisrael.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chabanu mikol hamim v'natan lanu torato Baruch atah noten Torah.
Amen.
Okay, Kevin, teach us.
Okay, I'm going to teach you. I found something about idolatry and idol worship. Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. It's a negative commandment to entertain no thought that there is any other God except the blessed Hashem. As scripture states, you shall have no other gods before me. This is in Shmot. Whoever entertains a thought in his mind, chatz v'chalela, that there is any other God except him, some partner or associate, chatz v'chalela, or he considers in his mind the thought that there is some substance to idol worship, chatz v'chalela, he denies the very fundamental principle of Hashem is one, as we say in the Shema. Okay, one is not to utter any word whose sense is heresy, chatz v'chalela, or some acknowledgement of idolatry, chatz v'chalela. For if anyone acknowledges idol worship, it is as though he denies heretically the entire Torah, since he denies the very fundamental principle. And we are duty-bound to be ready to give up our lives and our might over this. For in regard to all things that touch on the main principle of our faith, there is an obligation to accept death if necessary and not transgress. Okay, I'm going to continue. Another one of the mitzvot in this theme is, it is a negative commandment to make no idol to worship. In Shmot, you shall not make yourself a graven image. If a person transgressed and made one, whether he fashioned it himself or he ordered it made, he should be given whiplashes. If he made it for himself, he should be given whiplashes twice over his prohibition, over the injunction. And the source in Vayikra says, and do not make yourselves molten gods. Okay, the third one, it is a negative commandment not to make any idol to be worshipped by himself or anyone else, even for a heathen. And Vayikra states, do not make yourself molten gods. If a person transgressed and made one, he should receive whiplashes. Okay, the next one, it is a negative commandment not to bow down and prostrate oneself to an idol. In Shmot, it says, you shall not bow down to them, since it is a form of worship of the worship of the blessed God. If one acted in this way towards an idol, he would deserve death by stoning, even if this is not the usual way of worshiping it. If he did this deliberately without a prior warning, he would deserve karet. And if he did it unwittingly, he would have a duty to bring a chatas offering. So also, if someone ritually slays a sacrifice, sprinkles its blood, burns its parts, or pours a libation, which is a drink offering, since these were forms of divine service to the blessed God in the sanctuary, he's punishable over them if he performed them toward an idol, even if they are not usual ways of worshipping it. One should accept death if necessary and not commit such transgressions. If one's coins become scattered, or if a thorn lodged in his foot before an idol, he should not bow down before the idol to take it out or to gather them. Of course, it will seem as if he was prostrating himself towards an idol. He should rather turn his back to it or turn aside. Now, I've got a story about this, but we'll finish to this. This last point. Just outside Beit Shemesh, I don't know if you know, Arthur, there's actually a monastery, which is actually, I think, functioning. It's weird. It happens to be there. So the cops received a call. They had to send a patrol car a couple of years back to there was a call, and one or two of the cops were from. I think, well, there's only two cops that were there. One of them was from Oak, and the entrance to the actual monastery, he had to bow down and get on his knees and crawl. It was this weird. It's this weird and a weird entrance. So he went backwards. He went on his back and crawled backwards, and not frontwards, to not prostrate himself or seem that he was bowing down to the idols, to the Avodah Zarah. How's that?
Sure. That's
Wow.
Kevin, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Sure.
Someone told me it's not an open legend. Someone said there is a monastery there. It's you can see it if you go to a high point in Aleph, Ramat Beit Aleph. You'll actually see the monastery from a certain neighborhood.
Well, I didn't know that.
Wow.
All right. Kev, that was good. What I'm going to do, we learned a rule in 26b3 of Bava Kamma, and Rabbah also said, if one threw a child off the top of a roof and someone else came along and met the falling child with an upturned sword, the disliability of one wielding the sword is the subject of a dispute between Reb Yehuda ben Beseira and the rabbis, whose views are recorded in the Brisa coming from Sanhedrin 77b. Gavin brought up a very, very good point, that he could see that initially who's to blame, the person that threw the child off the roof. And the reason being is that if there wasn't a man with an upturned sword, there would be concrete below and the child would die irrespective. And he's learning that law from Rabbah, which we just learned before, which states it's the start of the process that sets the process in motion, because there's no ways this child would have survived. I think Gavin's got a very good point, and he's actually supported by all the rabbis in that particular case. So well done, Gavin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very seldom.
The point was, why would someone want to stab this child? Why would the guy have his sword? What's the reason for that? Why did he do that?
Throughout history, Jews can't fathom it because we're generally very, we're merciful. We can't. You're talking about people here.
Was that a non-Jew that did it?
It's a non-Jew.
Okay.
A non-Jew
Okay.
Democrat.
Well, let's just say, on a serious note, let's just say the halacha might be a Jew, because there's a difference between a Jew and a non-Jew with the halachas. But let's just say it's a Jew that worked for the Roman army, for argument's sake. Let's just say he was a Hellenist. Okay, let's just say he was a Jew, but he was a Hellenist and he worked for the army. Whatever. So Gavin's opinion made sense to me, because the child would have died either way.
Okay.
And if you have a look at how do we see it from Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira's point of view. Okay, so this is how we go to Sanhedrin 77b. For it was taught in a brisa, if 10 people beat someone with 10 sticks, in other words, each of the 10 assailants wielded a club, which he dealt a blow to the victim, and he died as a result of this beating. Whether the 10 struck him at the same time or one after another, all of them are not liable to execution. So how do we understand this? We learned this before, by the way. Guys, do you remember when we talked about there were 5 guys on a bench?
Yeah, that's my favorite story.
Remember when the bench So then we brought this case of Sanhedrin. Is it the final person that sits on the bench, or is it the cumulative weight of all of them that created the cracking of the bench?
Final person.
So, I mean, it was a complicated discussion. So here we're talking about a death penalty case. So what we're saying is as follows, is that in a case where they hit him simultaneously, why are they not liable for murder? Because they each struck him simultaneously. So basically, if each person struck him simultaneously, you can't ascertain which individual did the final death blow, because all of the blows occurred relatively within the same time. Then there's a separate situation that's given, the situation in the Gemara where they beat him in succession. So each of the assailants could have dealt him a blow that was powerful enough to kill him, but he didn't die after the beating was over. So obviously, if they struck simultaneously, you can't point the finger. But if it's blow after blow after blow, he didn't die from the first 9 blows. That's according to Rabbi Ben Sarah. It was the 10th blow which certainly hastened his death. Okay? That goes on to Sanhedrin 77 to 78. Now, although the 10th blow did actually kill him, the rabbis absolve even the 10th assailant from liability for murder. Why? Because we don't know if it was the 10 blows that actually killed him or that was a cumulative effect of the first 9 blows, meaning he sustained such physical injury from the first 9 blows that it is assumed that the 10th blow actually just hastened his death, meaning he was dead man walking. So in that particular case, that would actually support Gavin's view in a technical way. The 10th person killed a child that was dead already, technically. Does that make sense?
Yeah. James, can I ask you? Can I say something?
Yeah. Okay.
No, just with those 10 people killing him. The reason, and another reason possibly why they can't be all killed is because it's a life for a life, not 10 lives for one.
Yeah, that's correct. Is that you can't just kill. I've still got to investigate that. It was one of my questions when I studied Sanhedrin. Because according to Ian and Gavin's special book of Getting Off the Hook,
Yeah.
it's done half seriously and half in humor, because the reality is we really battle to understand, because then all murders should be done in groups. In other words, if you're going to get it from the murder because you can't pin it on one person and it's a life for a life, exactly as Arthur quoted, which is correct, why not commit a murder in groups of 4? So that you can't, because, do you understand what I'm saying? It's a problem. I need to understand, and I don't understand why the rest would get off the hook.
For
But you
absolution.
remember that, Damon, that book that myself and Ian were writing was how to get off in this world.
No, I know.
It says
That's
that
a very
you're still responsible. You're still responsible in the next world. Absolutely, all 10 of them will be responsible.
Okay, so Gavin brought a very good point. Him and Ian jokingly and half seriously. Why it was a joke is because they both had a great sense of humor, but very seriously, there were perplexing issues in Sanhedrin of death penalty cases about how you would get off. One of them was this mentioning of Arthur, life for a life. And then if a group of people decide to work simultaneously to kill somebody, why is it they off the hook in this world? Now, Gavin's right. In the next world, we all pay. But we're living in this world and we have to live with those people. So it becomes very, very stressful. When bad people are allowed to get away with things in this world, it's a very stressful endeavor because you're living in the environment. And therefore, you're subject to their punitive and evil ways.
I just thought about it, Dan.
What?
I just had an idea. Okay.
Yeah.
The only way you can get tshuva if somebody kills someone for the next world is to give your life. Okay. But the 10 guys that killed the one guy will not get tshuva because none of them can give their life.
I don't, in that way, care if they get tshuva. I don't want those murdering people around my environment.
No, I'm saying
they've
got no chance because that's basically their punishment as a group. They're just not going to.
I agree with you. That might be a very good reason. That might be a very good reason that Arthur's saying is that it's very difficult for them to get tshuva because one person might not be able to atone for all of them. But I don't know. How it works.
Okay.
But the thing of it is, just to get back to this would seem to be the opinion that Gavin has of actually not the rabbis, Rav Ben Sarah. I think I made a mistake. The reason I'm saying it's Rav Ben Sarah, upon further reflection, Gavin, is that Rav Ben Sarah says that the person that deals the final blow is the person that would be responsible for the person's death, because he took just give me 1 second. I just need to cover a little bit of ground, because he took some life from him, and that's the equivalent of taking all his life. He took the very last breath he has. Okay, so that's what he says. So the person with the upturned sword then would be liable. But Gavin is saying according to the rabbis. The rabbis say it's dead man walking.
Yeah.
What? Let me. Is saying dead man walking, meaning that the person with the upturned sword killed an already dead person that would have landed on concrete. Okay, so Gavin's view is according to the rabbis. Kev, what did you want to say?
Yeah, so something related to that. Have you heard of the concept of makom bapatish with the hammer, the final hammer blow? That makes person. Is it similar to that? Is there a link? Not at all. Okay.
Is known as what you call a completion task in order to make a construction project finish on Shabbat. So, for example, if I've got one functional item, like a pair of glasses, and this pair of glasses is missing its, what do you call it? Its ear handle, and it would fall off my face, and therefore it wouldn't function as a pair of glasses. But I put in the final screws to attach it. Now it's a functioning pair of glasses. That's called the final hammer blow. It's the final finishing touches to render an article functional. And when it renders an article functional, at that point, that is prohibited from Shabbat.
I'm saying liability, and you said that the final guy, the last guy, is liable. So I thought there was a link.
The final hammer blow is also a term here used to say that you've taken the final breath of life out of somebody.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You can. But the term, what you used is exact. It's a halachic definition of completion of construction.
Makom bapatish.
Yeah, makom bapatish, meaning the final hammer blow. But I suppose you could use it conceptually here as well.
Yeah.
It's the final death in the coffin, the nail in the coffin. So, all right. So let me just carry on. So that Gavin, I'm sorry, I hadn't had enough sleep. You actually would go according to the rabbis. What does Gavin say? From the minute that the guy's thrown off the roof, he's going to land on the concrete below. So just because there's an upturned sword doesn't mean that the person that threw him off the roof isn't finally responsible. So that would be equivalent to the first 9 assailants that basically clubbed this guy to death, that the 10th guy clubbed an already dead man. Why? Because his injuries were such that he probably wouldn't have survived the 10th blow. You see, that's the issue in question. We don't know if he would have survived the 10th blow if there weren't the other 9. It's possible that the cumulative damage, that there's no way to medically know, actually caused his death, and the 10th person actually hastened his death. Does that make sense? Yeah? Off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can't determine if it was medically in this case determined that the 9, without the 10th blow, he would have died. The 10th blow didn't do anything. It only hastened his death. If the 10th blow created the actual death itself, for sure the 10th person is liable. But we're working in a case where we can't ascertain that. So if you interpret the verse that if you take any life from a person, and that's the final switch that turns their anatomy or functioning to where they leave this world, then Rabbi Becerra says that that person has actually caused the death. It's a case of a human tracer. A human tracer is a person that's got, like, for example, terminal cancer or something like that, and somebody gives them morphine at the last stage to let them die early. So that person has actually caused them to die, even though they've got a terminal illness. So Rav Becerra would say that that person indeed is actually responsible, whereas the rabbis would say you're already killing a what do you call it, a terminal patient, so to speak. Now, it's interesting. The halacha goes according to Rabbi Becerra, by the way, in terms of that there's a prohibition not to end the life early of somebody that is terminal. However, is this person that actively does it responsible for the death penalty? That's what we're trying to find out. That's what we're trying to find out. So this is how the argument is discussed. There's a chapter in Leviticus, chapter 24, verse 17 in Vayikra. Okay? and it says, if a man shall strike all human life, he shall be put to death. And the rabbis interpret all human life to mean all of a person's life, right? So hastening the death of a mortally beaten man, however, is deemed taking away only part, but not all of his life. So the last assailant isn't liable either, because he would have died, this beaten up guy, whether or not there was the 10th assailant or not. But Rabbi Yehuda ben Besaira interprets a critical phase differently. All human life, kol nefesh adam, to mean any of a person's life, even part of it that's left. So the last assailant is liable for depriving the victim of part of his life and hastening his death. So therefore, he would be liable for the death penalty. But obviously, Rabbi Ben Sarah says that if the 10 men strike the victim simultaneously, he's not liable for the death penalty, because nobody knew he actually killed him.
Mm.
Rabbi ruled that we follow the start of the process. The falling child is partially dead before the one with the sword even impales it. So the rabbis would absolve the one with the sword from liability, whereas Rabbi Yehuda ben Besaira would rule him liable for hastening the child's death. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're now going to continue with the discussion. Rabbi continues. What happens instead of a man coming along and meeting the falling child with a sword? There's a muad ox, and he came along and met the falling child with his horns, killing him. Does the owner of the ox have to pay kofar? And obviously, it's a dispute between Rav Yishmael, the son of Yochanan ben Baroka, and the rabbis. Guys, can you tell me what your views are? Each of you, I'm interested.
No, it's a. Sorry, guys, go ahead. Sorry.
I think maybe the ox was trying to protect itself. It saw a falling child. It might not have been an act of caring, so as such. It might have been an aggressive act.
Okay, so let's just say that in a normal case of kofar, the owner was warned this is a normal muad ox. It kills a child. But the ox, we can't read its mind. So we don't know if it was playing frisbee or whether or not it saw a child falling and it decided to gore its horns so it wouldn't be squished by the child. So Kevin's brought a good point, is that maybe you see a falling object and your first thing to do is to stop it. So I think it's actually a valid point. The premise here is set up that we have to assume that this is an infant child from the way the Gemara seems to indicate, and that this bull is 400 kilograms and it's going to be the equivalent of a peach landing on your head. That's all in terms of weight. And the fact that it's a muad ox, which means it's got a history of aggressive behavior. That's the default position. So we want to know now, does the owner pay kofar? But Kevin, I think your point is right. When you see something falling, you go like that.
Protection mechanism. Defense mechanism.
But
so
now Damon, you saying that again, the same story where the baby is thrown off the balcony again.
No. We're saying a slightly different story. We're not asking if the owner.
That's what I thought about Gavin. Yeah.
Okay, Gavin, it's a good point. We're not saying that the person that throws the baby out the thing isn't liable for causing the death, because a human is much more culpable than an animal. Obviously, what we're saying is, does the ox owner, for a muad ox that causes the final death blow, is he liable to the kofar payment or not? And in fact, no. Gavin's got a great point. The exact wording in the Gemara is bar shor vakablu vakar nag, which means the previous verse to that is talking about, all it's talking about is meeting the falling child with a sword. So let's answer Gavin's question, and let's answer Kevin's question and say, this child for some reason had no pushing person. It fell off a roof.
Okay.
Because Gavin's question has a big implication, is that obviously that according to the rabbis, the person is more liable than an ox, and the person that pushes a child off the roof is liable, and the ox isn't liable to the same level of a human. So the default position is the child just fell from the roof. Gavin, excellent.
That's what I thought also. Yeah.
It was non-specific in the Gemara. I just read it now. So let's assume the child just fell from the roof. It fell. And then the ox below went to go and see this mid-falling child, moored ox, moored, and gored it with its horns. Is the owner liable for kofir?
Again, that baby would have died falling anyway, even if it wasn't pushed.
Okay.
So it's not like the baby was in the public domain and, or even in its private domain. The baby was falling to its death regardless. If he was pushed, then obviously the person that pushed him is culpable. If he fell, then the party that owns even the ox that's moored is exempt. I mean, what has the ox done wrong?
Okay, what you're saying is absolutely correct. So what we say is, it's according this argument with Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, and the rabbis. So Gavin is in top form today. So Gavin says exactly what he does before, that you have to assume here that the rabbis and Rav Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, have decided that, all right, let's address the issues if you're going to hold by Rabbi Ben Saira. Because if you're not going to hold according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Besaira, you've got a problem. Why? Because again, as Gavin quite rightly said, and Gavin, you were totally on the mark, is if a person threw the child off, then the person's responsible. But the Gemara said a falling child off the roof. But even if that's the discussion, the child would already have died. So is the owner responsible or not? I tell you where it's different to the original case, is that if the premise just discusses the falling child off the roof, which the Gemara does, by the way, I've read the word, it's implying that nobody pushed the child off. So you're not choosing between liability of parties. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're talking about, but the argument reasserts itself. Gavin's not incorrect. But it's not the argument of Rav Yehuda ben Peseira. It's an argument of Rabbah that reasserts itself. Why the argument of Rabbah? Is it the start of the process, or is it the final analysis of what happens at that actual point that is discussed? I think the other opinion is a buyer, if I'm not mistaken. I think it could be a buyer. That it's at the final point of breakage or damage. What we're saying is here is that this is how the discussion is going. It was taught in the Brisa. The verse shall state concerning one whose moored ox kills yet again, and he shall give him kofir for his life. So it means, what does it mean, his life? You could say it's got one of two different aspects to it. The one aspect, quickly guys, we don't have more than 12 minutes left. The one aspect of the kofir payment, as Gavin quite rightly mentioned weeks ago, is that maybe you want to compensate the families. Because again, you're paying actual damage, nezek, shalom, but maybe because this is a kofir ox, you're entitled to pay more of a compensation because you were warned about the habitual nature of your aggressive animal. And therefore, there's more compensation that's due to the family because this death could have been avoided. So according to the one discussion, Gavin, that kofir payment, Kevin, on your way, is that what we're saying is a kofir payment can be one of two aspects. I hold by the opinion, which I can understand more, that it's an atonement, that a person should have lost their life because what they did is, after being warned multiple times by the Sanhedrin or the Beis Din, they had an animal that was like a loaded gun that had created many, many disasters, more than 3. And at the point of the 4th time, it actually killed somebody. So the owner is responsible in Shemaim. Therefore, it's a kofir payment. There is another opinion that it could be an atonement payment because you were so negligent for the life of the victim. So either it's to save the life of the owner, because the owner should be giving over his life, and in Shemaim they hold him responsible. Therefore, instead of sacrificing himself, just like we make all sorts of other sacrifices on Yom Kippur for the chicken, etc., and Kippuris, is that this person has to pay a monetary payment that would almost financially break him, because in Shemaim is responsible, and he should have paid with his life. In other words, he should have got the death penalty, but because his animal killed, he can't get the death penalty. It's not direct. But if he caused it, it's as if in Shemaim he was responsible. So that's a kofar for atonement. The other opinion is that it's a kofar because he has to compensate the family extra, so that it's worked out on the victim. So is the kofar worked out on the amount of what the person who was irresponsible with his ox is in this world, in other words, his market value, or is it responsible on the victim of what that victim was worth and his market value? Maybe he was an accountant, maybe he was a scribe. So do we say that the kofar, it basically says that, and he shall give a kofar for his life. That's the exact term. And this is in Shemot chapter 21, verse 30. Okay? So all interpret this to mean that the kofar payment is equivalent to his value. But who do we mean by his value? Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
So if we're
Yes.
talking about his value, then it becomes a much clearer case. Why does it become a much clearer case? Because we say that according to the child that fell off the roof, what have you killed? A person, that child was going to die anyway, so he doesn't have financial value. You're killing somebody already dead. So therefore, there's no kofar. If you want to hold it on the life of the child, then you don't obviously pay kofar, because we're not saying, hang on, the child's not a breadwinner, therefore he's not worth any money. Jews don't react like that. Every human life is sacred. We're saying the reason is you don't pay the kofar, because if it's worked on the life of the child, it's according to what Gavin said. You're killing an already dead child. So therefore, what have you done? You haven't done anything. Your animal hasn't done anything. So therefore, there's no kofar if you're judging it on the victim. But if you're saying the kofar is on the owner of the ox, that owner of the ox is alive and liable to pay. Does that make sense? And therefore, you pay in the kofar payment if you're working out it's an atonement on the owner of the ox, but not on the victim, because the victim is already dead. You can't work out the value of a dead person because they have no value in this world in financial terms. They're not they're not functional.
Yep.
Does everybody understand what I'm saying? But please don't misunderstand and think that a child doesn't have financial value just because he's not working.
Mm.
But the point of it, because the child was no longer alive, you can't attest a value to what you could compare to a living child, because the
But
child
if
was
take another example, Damon, just to help. If a 50-year-old man falls off a building, same example.
not the, it's exactly how's it it is the same example, but what's
Also
your
dead.
reason?
He's got no value. He was falling off the roof. Same
Exactly.
argument.
All I'm trying to discern is it's not because the child isn't a breadwinner yet that you're not paying for the value of a child because he's not earning a salary. You're not paying for the child because the minute the child was thrown off the roof, it's as if he's dead. So you don't pay the loss of a corpse, because a human being has value while they're alive. And the distraught loss emotionally of that is comparing somebody that's living to somebody that's no longer. So somebody that's no longer, and you're saying they're no longer, they don't have the value because they're in the same state now as they were before. Exactly as Gavin said. Okay, so that being the case, let's just read on. So it's a subject of dispute between Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baruch, and the rabbis, whose views are recorded in the Bryce as follows. For it was taught in the Bryce, the verse states concerning one whose muad ox kills yet again, and he shall give kofar for his life. Whose life? This means the value of the victim, according to So this means the value of the victim. Let's just see according to whose opinion that could be. Okay. Um, According to Rav Yishmael, um, he believes that it's according to what the ox's owner is worth on the market, right? So Rav Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baruch, says this means the value of the damager. In other words, who's the damager? The ox's owner. And assuming the view of Rav Yehuda ben Beseira, who says one who impales and thereby hastens the death of the falling child is considered a killer. The liability of the ox's owner to kofir will depend on the dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and the rabbis. According to the rabbis who calculate the kofir according to the value of the victim at the time of his death, no kofir is paid since the falling child who was in the process of falling to his death has absolutely no market value at the time the ox killed him. According to Rav Yishmael, however, who calculates the kofir according to the value of the ox's owner, who does not have market value, who does have a market value, kofir is paid. So guys, this is very interesting because it seems that the rabbis say that it's based on the victim's value, that because you were negligent, you hasten the death of somebody premature to their time. So apart from paying for the actual life, you pay a further payment apart from the nezek shalem, because you don't pay the 4 other things when your animal kills somebody. Your animal is forbidden for benefit. The animal is stoned, and according to which you pay an additional payment for kofir because you should have paid with your life in Shemaim because you were negligent, but that money actually goes to the victim's family because you actually hastened the death of somebody that could have lived a good life. So that answers Gavin's question, because many times ago he said, but the victim's family should be compensated. So according to the rabbis, apart from the actual damage, that compensation is done on the victim's life. And it still might be, Gavin, that there's an atonement. It's an atonement process. But basically, Rabbi Yishmael is saying that it's worked out on the life of the ox's owner, which means even more so the guy's more aware that he could have lost his life in Shemaim and been liable to the death penalty for his negligence. So he wants to bring the issue home and more relevant to the ox's owner to give him a bigger fright. But it doesn't mean just because the rabbis say that you pay on the value of the victim, in addition to the nezek shalom, the actual damage, that it doesn't help him in Shemaim for atonement. Indeed, it does. But now it's having a practical benefit of helping the family as well. And it's calculated. And it also teaches him that he needs to pay an atonement. Why? Because he now knows that he's deprived the family of a breadwinner because of his negligence. So both points are very valid. Any question, guys?
No. It's interesting that. No. James, could also be based on the fact that you actually, besides depriving a child's life, also deprived that life of earning potential money in the future. Like that could have been something great.
No. And the reason being is that we don't know if a child will grow up to be wicked or righteous and be an asset to the family or liability. We don't know if the child will grow up to be a pauper or wealthy. And what's determined by financial liability generally is who is dependent on that person in the current state for money.
Okay. Just no,
it's a good point. But that person in the current state is worked out for what the family has lost, whatever the current value. And because the child is equally as important as an adult in the sense that even a child's life is valuable, that the emotional trauma the family suffers will be compensated according to if it's paid on the victim's value, because that victim was, even though the child is not a breadwinner, essentially valuable to the family. The family mourns the child, whether that person earned a living or not. It doesn't make a difference to the family. In fact, to lose a child is worse than to lose a parent or a spouse, because it's the natural order of things to maybe lose a spouse when you're older or a parent. But a child is emotionally, you never recover from something like that. So you have to pay it if that's based on the victim's worth. But if the child's already considered dead in halachic definition, you're not paying for something that was already transpired. You're comparing dead to dead.
Okay, got it.
All right, guys. I hope this shit good. It's lovely to see you. I wish you a good Shabbos.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
guys too. Thank you.
all right, Arthur, I'm pleased you well. This year again is done in your health's merit, and also for the neshama of Ian Shapiro,
Yeah.
Yisrael Ben Yecheskel.
Amen.
And Arthur,
Yeah.
may you live a long life, and may we all aggravate you with love.
Amen.
All right.
And you guys do it so well.
Love you all. I hope you have a
Love
good